down to the source documents, contracts, agreements, talking to a lot of people, going to the outside world, asking questions of third parties, all in the name of figuring out if there are errors and fraud that are material to the financial statements the management has put together. So to do that, the management has a certain responsibility. Its responsibility is to follow GAAP, put together some financial statements that are on a GAAP basis, but they also have a broad responsibility for internal controls over their accounting and financial reporting process. That's them, that's not us, right? If they can't do it, they should be hiring some people. So they might go out and get a consultant or two to dig down and figure out what kind of controls they should have in place based on the risks that they might have within the organization to put some controls in place. So the discussion we're about to have, I mean, you can look at it at so many different angles. It could be you're a member of management, it's your responsibility to build controls over anything, not just financially, but complying with laws and regulations, making sure our product doesn't hurt thousands of people, being environmentally conscious about how we're treating the environment, our community responsibility, anything. You can apply this to just about anything. We'll focus more on the financial statements, financial reports. But yeah, we will go into this within that light, trying to understand we're either management trying to build controls, or the auditor coming in to do an audit. Either way, there's got to be some framework, some level of consciousness as to what that all means, because it's very ambiguous. So the goal of today is to bring some structure around a very complex and ambiguous subject matter of internal controls. So we're going to start by trying to figure out how did we get here, how did we get to the point that controls started to matter. A lot of that has to do with Sarbanes-Oxley. So I'm going to give you a few pieces of framework today that will be highly important throughout the course. All right, I've been mentioning this probably from day one. Auditors and management, when it comes to financial reporting, should concern themselves with two types of misstatements. And auditors look at these by way of professional responsibility. It's outlined very, very well within our professional standards that this is what we're responsible for. Now I put the word material in your notes right here because we're not responsible for all of this. Management's responsible to also ensure that in their financial reporting, accounting, bookkeeping, all of the above, there's no material fraud and error. So they've got to build some kind of a process and system in place to make sure that these aren't resident in their financial reporting and disclosure. So, if you step back and say, hey, I'm going to read some financial statements, I'm going to use these financial statements, I've got $100 grand laying around, I want to put it somewhere, this company looks great, flip through the financial statements, everything looks in order. You're going on the presumption, as you do that those financial statements are free of misstatements. Nothing materially misstated, omitted, nothing far-reaching about those financial statements. That's what you're hoping as you're about to hand your $100,000 to somebody else. So if we take the term misstatement, which everyone has faith there are no material misstatements in financial reporting, we break it down into two areas that within this course in particular we're going to spend a lot of time and attention on. The first being fraud, which is the intentional act of deceiving another party. So we're mostly talking about the preparers of financial reporting now. Management has somewhat of an interest in making financial reports look really good. You might be getting a bonus at the end of the year based on the financial results. They could have stock. Many accountants in their organization are also stockholders by virtue of stock plans that the company has. Most executives are stockholders by virtue of the company awarding them stock as part of their compensation. So these are incentives, if you will, by management to want to prop those financial statements up. So they may deceive the users of the financial statements into believing the company is performing more successfully than it really is. They've got incentive. I've got $1 million bonus hanging out there because it's somehow wrapped around sales and or net income, earnings per share. My human nature may be to make sales and income and earnings per share look as good as possible, cast it in the best light. That's just human nature. There's not a whole lot you can do about that. Even somebody who has integrity may not use that integrity wisely when it comes to their pocketbook. And personal incentive and bias comes into play. That's what I have to deal with on a daily basis in my world. Because I've been on both sides. I've been the CFO of a public company. I know what it feels like to have certain pressures and certain incentives, when it comes to your net worth and when it comes to other people's net worth in the organization. There's a certain amount of pressure that comes with that. And now I know what it's like to be on the other side, knowing what certain people's biases and pressures and incentives might be. So at the end of the day, that's number one. You kind of have to go into an audit understanding that most people can and will commit fraud. That's called skepticism, by the way. Somewhat on the borderline of cynicism, but an auditor is highly skeptical. They're going to believe you're probably committing fraud. We're trained to do so. Doesn't mean we're mean, well maybe, I don't know. But it just means that we're trying to be skeptical when we go into an organization.
How many frauds that you've uncovered have been going on for years?
Mostly that's
Most
the case.
have, right?
Yeah, it's like a culmination of 4 or 5
Of a lot of
years.
different things, right?
Yeah, and many times it's where somebody's been stealing cash for a number of years, pulling it out of the organization.
And it started with a couple of dollars and just got bigger, right?
Right, yeah, that's kind of gets
Also,
addicted to it.
in public companies as an investor,
Mhm.
I see people giving indications, CEO will give some sort of a forward guidance
Yes,
that is based on either an accounting principle or some view of the future.
Right.
It turns out to be incorrect. It doesn't want to walk that back.
yeah, or they put it out there, and then they realize that operations aren't gonna support that, so then they start playing with the accounting guidance to try to.
To try to hit it, right?
Exactly,
And
that's a
they step
great
up
idea.
with small numbers. Maybe they start by rounding their EPS or those, do you know what I mean?
Oh, you
And
are
then-
right on target for today, my friend.
But then they'll, over time, it just got too big.
Gets away from them.
You got away from it.
They park it on the balance
So they
sheet.
didn't start out saying, oh, I'm gonna commit fraud.
Right, it's like, well, we missed it by that much, let's just take it, it's immaterial, we'll just take it over the line, no one gets hurt.
So
And
now
then
my
the next
question,
year- sorry, go ahead.
I'd prefer to see an auditor find that sooner. How do you find that sooner?
Well, what you do is you take what you just said, which this was a little thing, and you start thinking in those terms. If you set a bright line and materiality is $10 million, and everything under the 10 million you ignore, you're not a very good auditor, because there could be some very small things.
That might,
With the
Yeah.
intent, even though it was small, it was that one thing that.
causes a rounding error.
Yeah, or that got him to meet analysts' expectation. If that was a $300,000 adjustment and it's under our scope, we gotta watch for those things too. When they're hugging some kind of an analyst line or an expectation in the marketplace, a lot more becomes material. So it's a matter of, fundamentally, how do I look at materiality? Not always a bright line. Yeah, Janet, welcome back.
Thanks. So does that mean that, like, the smaller the company, if they have less revenue and everything, that it's easier to find, harder to hide it in their financial statements?
It's difficult in about every company, but yeah, our materiality numbers may be a lot lower
Yeah,
in those smaller companies. We base a lot on net income.
yeah.
Tend to hover around 5 to 10% of net income as our materiality number. So the smaller that income and the smaller the revenue, the more we're going to look at. But it's all relative. 10 million to one company could be 100,000 to another company. What's material? So the second thing, we'll come back to fraud here in a second, and that's going to be the center of what we talk about. The other thing is just unintentional stupidity or laziness or just inadvertent problems that come along. And those are resident in about every company. So the question is it just an error here and there, a small amount, or Or is it rampant? Is it something going on within a system, the way that's been programmed ineffectively? Is it a person that's incompetent that really should not be going through the gap accounting, making poor judgments? So many different things that can occur on the error level. Most of that is human in nature. Just inability of a human being to always be at the top of their game. Or it could be training. You know, you get a new person in, that person that was doing it before was great. You know, they made very few errors. Person coming in behind them, you know, really train them the way they should. They're not as confident as the last person. That tends to be one of those situations. So this is kind of on its way to fraud or to controls, right? If this is the villain, this is what we're trying to prevent. There's got to be some mechanism within a company to ensure that this stuff isn't happening to a material degree. That's where we're heading with this conversation. All right, now we're going to take fraud, and this is where Matt was really kind of pushing at the nerve of this. We take the fraud and we break it down into two areas that I want you to come to know and love very excitedly in your personal life. One is manipulation, the other is misappropriation. Those are very big words for manipulation being more of what Matt was talking about in changing the numbers. So put in your notes, cooking the books. This is cooking the books. This is where you've got the CEO of the company, for example, who owns a large amount of stock. And for them to make their $10 million this year, you know, some ungodly amount of dollars that some of these people make, they've got to hit a certain earnings number so the market will respond, so the stock price will go up. But if the marketplace doesn't see certain numbers in those financial statements, the fair value of that stock won't increase. So that CEO may be a party to going to the accounting department and asking for changes to be made in the financial statements. This could be, you know, mostly this happens at the managerial and executive level. People who own stock, have stock options, big bonuses, whatever. Those are the folks that are going to attack fraud a different way. They're going to go in and change numbers and financial reporting disclosures to manipulate that financial statement so the company appears more successful, so that they make their money a different way. They're not going to directly go in and steal money, right? They're going to get it. They're going to get it from the shareholders because they're going to sell their shares to some unknowing victim who thinks the company's doing well. The insider of the company knows the company's not doing so well, but props up the financial statements to make it look like it is, thus to sell their stock at a high to somebody who's going to buy it when the stock may be worth half what the market is saying it is. All right, so that's an example of manipulation. Again, we have to get down to the root cause of why somebody does this. Most of the time, it's because they are going to try to benefit from the sale of stock, exercise and sale of stock options. Exercise the option, get the stock, sell the stock, you get the point, at some large margin. Bonuses and salaries come into play. Many times those are tied somehow to the performance of the company. You got the people on the inside of the company who can change the books and records, change the financial statements. Well, they're the ones that can manipulate, so their bonuses and raises are bigger. This could be just keeping a job, for instance. If you see that the company is coming on hard times, you know that when the company falls on hard times, there's going to be layoffs. You don't want to be the one getting laid off. You might have a bias or incentive to make the company look better so there aren't layoffs, right? Or if the bank has a caveat that if the company falls below certain levels, they're going to call the bank note. And by calling that bank note, as you're seeing in this example of the first case, they could put the company out of business. You like your job, you're afraid you can't get another job anywhere else, so you've been, defrauding the company for years, making them think you're actually confident when you're not. They're buying it. Nobody else will. Then, you might have some incentive to things come into play. These are all examples that I might put on the test of what manipulation might look like. So think about, well, who's doing it? Well, it's usually executive management. Executive management, why are they doing it? Because they own stock, they've got good jobs, they got good bonuses, they want to keep all that. That makes sense. Okay, the other piece is misappropriation. That's a big word for embezzlement or theft. So if you can't make your tens or hundreds of millions by playing around with financial statements, you could make hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars by just going to the cash, right? What's in the bank, what the customers are sending in, called collections, what you're paying out to vendors who aren't really vendors, because it's your sister or whatever. That's called disbursements. That's all misappropriation. So finding new and creative ways to steal money, cash, typically, could be inventory, but usually it's cash, from the organization. So that one's pretty easy. The incentives there are quite straightforward. There's some cash, I think they'll take it. What else is there, right? And most people that find an opportunity or a way to take cash or funds from an organization will eventually do it. It erodes with the integrity of the soul. You see it right there. See that opportunity. No matter who you are, after a while, or given the right rationalization, you're gonna take it. We'll get into that. All right, questions so far? Two types of misstatements: fraud and error. Two types of fraud: misappropriation, manipulation. Each has different meaning. One of them is more financial statement driven, and that's manipulation. The other has indirect impact on the financial statements, but is more about the resources of the company getting diverted. The indirect relationship to the financial statements on misappropriation is that maybe there was a disclosure that should have been there that the controller of the company over the course of the last 3 years has stolen $8 million, or we've had a misclassification of expenses. We said that there were some G&A expenses of $8 million. That should have been classified as loss, cash loss due to theft. So some of it's just classification within an income statement indirectly. And then just as a side to all of this, there's kind of another category that comes into play, which has to do with bribery, corruption, illegal acts, for instance. So that becomes, it's not fraud, it's not error, but an auditor has a certain responsibility as well to look for illegal acts that would have an impact on financial statements. So if you go out and bribe a Korean official to be able to get some benefit in Korea from a business perspective, that could yield contingencies. It could yield some dollars you're going to have to pay to the U.S. government for FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act violations.
Isn't it legal for in other governments, like for Russia, you have to bribe if you want, for the most part, to get your business done.
Right.
So
Catch-22, right?
yeah. So I mean, I don't know. Because I've read a lot of articles on that. Because there's always something coming up where they're like, well, Apple or whatever, they ended up having to bribe somebody. Walmart, they have to bribe in order to get the value, and technically, that's a norm for that government. Not necessarily here, but because that's where they're doing business, is technically okay. Or is it?
See, and I would say initially my reaction would have been, that's a prime ethical dilemma. But then I step back and it's like, it's just illegal. There's not even a fine line between what's legal and what's ethical. What's legal is the first hurdle, and then ethics is somewhere beyond that, right?
Right.
It's either legal or not legal, because it's legal, but should I do it? Who am I hurting is kind of the ethical part of that. So from a legality perspective, the U.S. has laid down some very harsh laws. This is exactly the emphasis of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977, which essentially regulates what a U.S. company can do outside of the U.S. And any time you're going to pay a foreign official to better your company in that arena, that's a violation of the act. That we're talking, you can be fined millions and millions of dollars for that. So, yeah, Russia says, come and bribe us, or you can't do business here, the US says, okay, you know, if you do that, we're gonna slap you with a pretty big fine. And people go to jail too, like officers of the company
Right.
could end up in jail. So the US has tried to make it severe enough so that people will think twice and hopefully not engage in that. Yeah, that's tough, right? Carissa?
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you though, because in our tax class, we learned that it's so common in Mexico that you can actually write it off as an expense, like bribery to foreign officials. So interesting to hear that, like, you can expense it on one side, but you'll be fined on another side.
Yeah.
It's just-
Yeah, what do you do with that, right?
That's good.
Since the act, at least in recent years, you've seen a lot of companies not wanting to violate the act, but partnering with companies, local companies in Russia, or local companies in that jurisdiction that do violate the act. They try to get around it. And I think enforcement has tried to push through those partnerships.
Yeah,
And
you've got to
even
consult.
enforce if you're getting a benefit from a partnership that is violating the act, even though they're not perhaps subject to it, you are, you're responsible even through it. So I think it's a pretty serious thing.
It is, and there's an example, this is a public company, so I'm not giving any confidential information away. There's a public company here in Utah who had a subsidiary in a foreign location, I think it was Brazil. So this is kind of cool, this is what happened. So the company had an office with some inventory in it down in Brazil, and out of nowhere the police come in and they say, they point to some of the employees and they say, where's the manager, where's the manager of this general manager of this location. They get him on the phone, get him down here. So the general manager comes in and the police say, you're going to jail and your employees are all going to jail right now because you don't have a cage around this inventory unless you give us $1,000 US. So the general manager goes, just a minute, gets the company on the phone. The company gets the lawyers on the phone. The lawyers go, okay, no problem. We got an office down in Brazil. We'll take care of this. So the Brazilian lawyer, who's accustomed to this kind of thing, says, oh yeah, this happens all the time. We'll take care of it. So the Brazilian lawyer pays the police. Okay, and then the company, this all comes to the surface, and the company gets charged with this violation. So it doesn't matter if it's looping around through other parties. If you hire a consultant, and the consultant hands a bag of money to a politician, a foreign official, just to get their product released in that marketplace, whatever's going to happen, that is also a violation of that. So they look at it at every angle, right? You just say, no, you can't do that. So just, put in your notes that illegal acts, FCPA being prime example, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977, prime examples of where things can go terribly wrong. Okay, so the people that commit fraud, if you think about it, we already kind of talked about the motivations and incentives. The higher you are in management, the more you're going to get the bigger score through the sale of stock, your salary, and your bonuses. So compensation and stock ownership becomes the bigger score for the upper management. You don't usually give a low-level employee 30,000 shares of your stock. Sometimes a lot of people got rich in the 90s because of that, but usually it's the upper management, it's the executives and board that own any significant amount of stock. So their incentive is more around manipulation. On the other hand, the employees, the line level employees, are more at the vantage point of being able to shuffle through the cash. So they are writing checks to vendors, they're receiving checks in cash from customers, they're out there with the inventory. If it's highly valuable, they might be able to steal it. So the employees might be more inclined to misappropriate assets or to steal them. It's not absolute, But in theory, management tends to handle, or tends to sway towards manipulation. Employees tend to sway toward your misappropriation. It can happen, and we're going to see an example of where this isn't true in every case. You could have the highest of the organization stealing inordinate amounts of cash. And that's what I'm going to show you next. Customers, the other two are kind of loss prevention and good business practice. So customers, of course, can give you bad credit card information. They can come into your shop and steal your inventory. So we can't forget about them. That over time could be material. Now, this doesn't have a lot of financial reporting impact because if customers are stealing your inventory and you're taking inventory periodically, it's going to fix itself through cost of goods sold. So the financial statements are right. If a customer gives you a bad credit card or check, or it's a phony account, that's all going to come through bad debt expense. So the financial statements are correct in the last two, customer and vendor frauds, but it's just bad business practice. And so auditors are a little less concerned about these, but the company itself should have controls in place for customers and vendors. Vendors who get kickback issues. You guys know what kickbacks are? Anybody ever done these? You'd be in jail if you did, right? So don't do that. This is like when you've got, in your own internal department, you have a purchasing department like you saw in SUA. You're purchasing goods from other parties. Those other parties say, look, if you'll just buy from us, we want to be your exclusive vendor. And pay, I don't know, 30% more than you would with anybody else. I'll send you and your family to Disneyland every 3 months. Best hotel, whatever the best hotel down Grand California, whatever. Put you up every 3 months. You and your kids are just, family. You're walking into Disney. That sounds good, right? I mean, my kids will love me. The hero. I'm only making like $45,000 a year as a purchase manager. That's great. I should do that. Well, that's a kickback. You're basically kicking back to the vendor to give them, you're giving them exclusivity, you're giving them a higher price, you're fleecing the company of its money because you're paying them more than you would any other vendor. In return, you personally are getting some advantage. You're taking away from the company's resources, basically. That's called a kickback. Vendors also play games with you where they'll figure out how to double invoice you, get your money twice, basically. They'll figure out where you don't have controls, and they'll do that, and also maybe charge you too much in the invoices because they know you're not matching up. Strike a deal with your purchasing department, pay you $1 a unit for this stuff, and then when the invoice comes, it's $2 a unit because they start figuring out that you're not reconciling anything. You'll just pay whatever bill you sent. You could have, this happens a lot from China and Russia for whatever reason, where phone calls will come in, hey, we're your vendor out here in China, we're going to stop shipment if you don't wire $1 million to us right now. And that's not even really your vendor, it's just somebody that figured out you're doing business with them. Like somebody at that Chinese organization might be a low-level employee that just combs through the customer list and figures out over the internet how to get a phone number or email, of an accounts payable person. They call your accounts payable person, and not officially from that company. They just say, they act like there's somebody important at that Chinese company. You're behind payment right now. They don't even know. They have no idea what's owed between the parties, but they know there's a business relationship between the two. So they make up this story that if you don't pay us $1 million right now, we're going to have to stop all your shipments. They know well enough that that's the lifeblood of that other company. And then, of course, it gets wired to their own personal account, the money disappears. It's fraud. Those kind of things go on all the time. So you have to train your employees to not take those phone calls or to not get in a rush to pay, to send wires out, and to check it out before they do it. A lot of money leaves companies because of that every year. Okay, so we've kind of gone through some of the examples of fraud that might occur. Just very quickly, let's go through a few more. So in misappropriation, it tends to be journal entries. This could be through override and pressure from management. This could be from the controller, himself or herself, just deciding my stock would go up if I do this. So that's going to be going in and altering sales, creating a journal entry to make sales bigger, or prop up inventory. If I can make my inventory bigger, you think about how this worked in SUA. If I put my inventory up, my cost of goods sold goes down. My cost of goods sold goes down, my net income goes up because that's less of an expense. So any way that a person within the company can think of, if they have access to the books or if they can pressure somebody who has access to the books, that's where most of the manipulation would occur. At a very detailed level, this is where some of the more sophisticated frauds occur. A person could go in and create several thousand customers and make it look like there was actually sales occurring. They could paper it over so the auditors can't figure it out. We've got all sorts of techniques we'll talk about in class when we try to find that, but these are some of the more extreme frauds that might occur. On the theft side, let's stay with manipulation for a minute. The other thing that might happen is the other side of that coin. The first side of the coin, I'm speaking of trying to make the books look better. The books look better, my stock's price is higher, and I can cash out. But on the other side of it, you might think, we did better than we thought. And our company's rocking this year. We told everybody we're going to be at $3 a share. We're at $6. Let's shave some of that off and save it for later. Right? That's called smoothing. I don't know if you guys have talked about this in other classes. Smoothing of income, cookie jar reserves, where you've had such an enormous year, you go in and make a journal entry. Let's reduce our income. Let's build some huge expense. We'll put like a $80 million expense on the books for contingent loss. We're gonna have a lawsuit, we're sure of it. Book 80 million. So we debit, expense 80 million, we credit contingent loss. And we kind of size that $6 down to 450 or something. Beat our expectations still, but now we're storing some away for later. Now, over the years, the next years to follow, if you're not quite meeting expectations, you can just carve some of that off, take it off the liability, change that estimate, debit the liability, credit something on the income statement, sales, expenses. And so you can start to use that pad that you build over the course of the next few years. That's called smoothing of income. Just trying to make your income meet expectations. All right, so a lot of different things that could happen in that case. That's more of the manipulation side. Of course, the misappropriation side, you could have people in your accounting department that get the checks from the customers and they just start taking, 1 out of every 1,000 check that comes in, they just take it, get it in the books, make it go away, make it look like it never happened, take it down to Walmart, cash it. The person that sent the check, the customer, they have no idea what happened because it just goes away. The check gets cashed like they thought it would. The company never sends another request for payment because the accountant on the inside of the company knows how to steal the cash, go into the books and write it off, so that person never hears about it again. The customer never hears about it again. So that's kind of one side of it. On the other side, more commonly, you would have somebody in accounting who can cut checks, create a vendor that's a company that's their brothers, maybe their own company, and just start cutting checks like crazy. And if nobody's watching, the expenses or the vendors or the payments, over time, millions of dollars could be going that direction. Those tend to be the two largest frauds. Obviously, if somebody can wire money around, they can just wire it to themselves and reconcile it away in the bank accounts. So we see that one of the biggest segregation of duties problems that we have is when custody over funds is intermingled with the ability to be an accountant, right, to report and make changes in the general ledger system. That tends to propagate more of this misappropriation notion. You guys kind of get the difference then between the two? Good, that's what I wanted to do today. so this is going to be a good tool to think about today, the movie I'm about to show you, but also in the future, we're going to get a little more in depth on fraud. We're going to take this toolkit and use it against one of the most classic frauds that occurred in the United States. It's old, but it has so many elements of fraud that was occurring under everybody's noses that I still use it today. So that's going to be called the Farmore case. That'll be in a few weeks. Might even be next week the way this class goes. I usually say that. It's going to happen real quick. Yeah, could be tomorrow. I don't know. But so kind of keep this on the back burner and think about it through the movie you're going to see now. You're not going to have to do anything with it. Might be on the test, but for one of the cases that's coming up, you're going to use this fraud triangle and have a paper on it. All right, so these are the three things that are typically resident in a fraud, whether that be theft of funds, misappropriation, or manipulation. Almost always there's opportunity. Opportunity means that the controls are down. There's no controls. There's what we've been talking about, incentive and motivation. I've got bonus, I've got stock. I'm going to get that promotion, I'm going to get that raise. That's incentive and motive. And then it's kind of coupled with, complemented by rationalization. This company owes me. I've been working here for 20 years. I should be able to give myself $20,000. I'm going to write myself a check. Rationalization gets a little darker sometimes. I've seen examples of where the fraud that's been occurring has been because somebody in the organization is having an affair. They don't want their husband or wife to find out about it, so you can't take your mistress to a hotel and put it on your family credit card, right? Wife's going to find that. So they use the company card. So over the, when this thing gets really dirty and sticky and whatever, they start putting a whole bunch, there's rings and there's trips to Paris, and there's all this kind of stuff because people lose their minds when they're in love or whatever that is. So that's rationalization, something maybe you don't think about. I've got to hide this from my family, so I might as well just do it through the company. Nobody's watching me because I have opportunity. Other darker rationalizations would be drug addictions. I got to get my fix, I got to go get my opioids, I just can't stop. They're getting expensive because the doctors won't give them to me anymore. So I have to get them off the street value's high. I'm running out of money in my personal accounts. Hey, look, the company's got money, I'll just take it, right? So it's kind of couple the opportunity with the rationalization, with the incentive, because you gotta feed my drug addiction. People have relatives with health problems, insurance money runs out, somebody's terminally ill. This is the sadder part of it, where somebody's kid has to have that operation or that procedure. Insurance is not there, don't have money in the bank, so we'll still. All right, all examples of how this fraud triangle is used. I think the best way to show you this is to give you one of my favorite real life cases, and this is Tyco. Have you guys heard or seen anything about Kozlowski and Tyco? Matt's seen it. This guy, Kozlowski, I feel a little bad for him, but then when you see this video, you won't feel that bad for him. He just kind of seems like this old guy that got put in jail, poor guy. Looks like somebody's grandpa. But, hopefully the sound will work here. Check out what this guy did and put this back to, is this misappropriation? Is this manipulation? What kind of fraud is this? And how did this fit in the fraud triangle?
Thick with tales of corporate scandal, lost pension funds, big-time theft, and even bigger-time prison sentences for the Enron gang. Then there was Dennis Kozlowski, CEO of Tyco, who was found guilty of, in effect, using Tyco's immense financial resources for what the prosecution described as his own personal piggy bank. You might remember the $6,000 shower curtain and stealing over $100 million from the company. Well, we wondered how the man who could whistle up a corporate jet on a whim or throw a $2 million birthday party was doing in his reduced circumstances. What's it like to go from king of the world to prisoner number 05A4820, serving 8 to 25 years behind bars? Once again, Dennis Kozlowski. We caught up with Dennis Kozlowski at Mid-State Correctional Facility in upstate New York.
How you doing? I'm okay.
Guests include murderers, drug dealers, and pedophiles, and the odd multi-millionaire.
In my wildest imagination, when I would project myself into my late 50s and early 60s, where I would be or what I would be doing, if I make a list of 100 different places or 100 different things, here would never make that list.
He now earns $1 a day, mopping floors and slinging hash to his fellow inmates. In January, Kozlowski spent a week in hospital with a heart ailment and got to thinking.
You've not taught publicly up till now. Why did you decide to do it?
When I was in the hospital in January, I was outside the emergency room feeling really uncomfortable, frightened. And that's when I really made the firm decision that I wanted to go through and talk to you at this time.
You became aware of your own mortality,
Very much so.
and you didn't want to leave this world
Without at least an opportunity to talk about my side of the story to the extent that I can talk about it.
He agreed to speak with one stipulation, that we would not include anyone else in this story. Because of an appeal, he'll not discuss the details of his case, but he will say,
I believe in the judicial system. I think all that works. But in this case, the jury got it wrong.
that jury convicted him of 22 counts of grand larceny, conspiracy, and securities fraud. His trials occurred in the wake of a white-collar crime ring, Enron, WorldCom, and Martha Stewart. The newshound smelled blood, accused of looting his company of hundreds of millions of dollars and living the life of a pasha at stockholders' expense. He was the living, breathing version of Wall Street's Gordon Gekko.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
Up to a point. What's puzzling is why does a man who struggled so hard, so effectively to make it, become so careless, or stupid, or arrogant? Born in a tenement on the wrong side of the tracks in Newark, New Jersey, Kozlowski worked his way through school.
I played guitar in a band. I worked in a pharmacy. I worked in a car wash. I had 2 or 3 jobs going at any given time.
Where you came from, there weren't that many options.
No, growing up in Newark, New Jersey at the time, you never thought of yourself growing up to become a CEO.
He started at Tyco, then a small New Hampshire manufacturing company, as an accountant making $28,000 a year, and worked his way up to CEO. He became known as Deal-a-Day Dennis, constantly acquiring new companies, and building Tyco from a $40 million company into a $40 billion conglomerate.
Would like to become, all things equal, a $100 billion company.
Wall Street could not get enough of the young, aggressive CEO. He also began making staggering amounts of money, among the top-earning CEOs in the country.
We had a pay-for-performance culture at Tyco, so most of the money I earned was in the appreciation of Tyco stock.
One year you made, I think, $170 million.
I'm not sure 170, but I made over 100 million.
Well,
It's more money than
10 million here, 10 million there, who cares? But what's it like to earn that kind of money?
It's a way of keeping score, I guess.
Keeping score meant keeping up with the masters of the universe. $30 million to build a mansion in Boca Raton, acquiring homes in Nantucket and Colorado, and just loose change $16 million for Endeavor, a vintage yacht. Wealth meant one thing, social acceptance another. He and his second wife, Karen Mayo, spent millions on painting. He joined the board of the Whitney Museum. For a pied-à-terre in New York, he had Tyco buy a $19 million apartment and decorated it with $11 million worth of stuff. The poor kid from Newark was stepping out on Fifth Avenue.
Would Dennis Kozlowski a few years ago even contemplate going to Europe to buy old master paintings?
No, absolutely not. It came with earning the amount of money I was earning at the time.
Was it your idea, or were you invited to join the board of the Whitney?
Oh, it was not my idea at all. I was invited to the board, and I never made a board meeting.
So you were invited because they like having really rich guys on board.
I assume it wasn't for my knowledge of art.
But it was art that that would lead to his undoing. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office was investigating galleries that were helping customers avoid sales taxes. Kozlowski had purchased $13 million worth of paintings, including Renoir and Monet, for the Tyco apartment. But prosecutors said he had some of them shipped to Tyco's offices in New Hampshire, a state without sales tax. They were then trucked back to New York. In 2002, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office indicted Kozlowski for evading over $1 million in sales tax, and he resigned as CEO. But that was only the beginning. The Tyco board investigated its CEO's behavior and made public a report that was devastating. Kozlowski's excesses were revealed in excruciating detail. Decorations for the New York apartment became classic tabloid headlines, mocking the CEO's taste and his greed. The $50,000 doggy umbrella stand, and the ultimate symbol of his downfall, that $6,000 shower curtain.
The coverage was really punishing.
That was horrible.
As overblown as the coverage may have been, you signed off almost.
I signed off on a decorator to decorate the Tyco apartment. And beyond that, that was my involvement. The first time I heard about that shower curtain, the first time was after I was out of the company and I read about it in a newspaper that was calling around asking, where's the shower curtain? But to this day, I wouldn't know where to tell on me, so.
And then there was the 40th birthday party for Kozlowski's wife Karen in Sardinia. It was togas galore, a 4-day festival of flesh.
That's right.
Jimmy Buffett was phoned in for the music, and guests were treated to a special cake, an anatomically correct woman with exploding breasts. The cost was over $2 million. Since Kozlowski claimed it was in part a word retreat, Tyco footed half the bill.
Was it embarrassing for you though when they played that tape? There was this kind of orgy going on.
Horrible. It was on the top. You know, I was taken aback by it, but I smiled and worked my way through it. Wanted the night end as fast as I could.
Donald Trump called your behavior tacky.
Tacky. Tacky from Donald Trump?
From Donald Trump.
Well, here we go.
Those excesses may have been tacky, but tacky doesn't sink into jail. Far more serious was the allegation that Kozlowski literally stole money from Tyco. He and his second-in-command, Mark Schwartz, were charged with stealing $170 million and pocketing an additional $430 million through the sale of company stock, while lying about Tyco's financial condition. The prosecution accused Kozlowski of granting himself unauthorized bonuses and running hundreds of millions of dollars worth of personal expenses through interest-free Tyco loan programs. No expense was too great or too small to run through Tyco. None of this, claims the prosecution, was authorized by the Tyco board, and the jury agreed. Guilty. But he's still fighting.
I am absolutely not guilty of the charges that were brought upon me. There was no criminal intent here. Nothing was hidden. There were no shredded documents. Nobody was told not to say anything. All the information the prosecutors got was directly off the books and records of the company.
In the trial, Kozlowski took the stand and testified that everything he did was authorized. He'd already repaid many of the loans and claimed he was simply an overworked executive who left the details for underlings to handle.
I was pushing the company and growing the company and pushing all aspects of it to continue to grow. I just don't think we put enough infrastructure in place to support some of that growth.
Yeah, but some of the lines got blurred. Some of the lines between what was your money, what was Tyco's money, became very fuzzy.
I think I did everything accordingly to the way the programs were outlined and the way it was done by my predecessors.
Was there a situation where the rules got lost?
Well, as I said, we're in appeal on this, and there's also civil litigation. So at this point in time, I think we're crossing the line here.
The Tyco board had given Kozlowski virtual carte blanche. And the one person Kozlowski said could clear it all up, the head of compensation, was dead. Whatever Kozlowski did, it was clear that the Tyco board was not exactly meticulous in carrying out its oversight. Even so, Kozlowski believes he was a dead duck from the start.
I was a guy sitting in court who made $100 million a year, and I think a juror sitting there just would have to say, all that money, he must have done something wrong. I think it's just, it's as simple as that.
Kozlowski says he was done in by bad timing, the Enron and WorldCom catastrophes. He feels that most people believe that's what happened to Tyco, that employees were left high and dry. But Tyco remains a thriving $60 billion company.
The company went on after I left there. The company is alive today, it's doing well.
Does it make you angry to be lumped in with guys like Bernie Ebbers and Kenway?
That just frustrated me to no end. These are companies that had financial and accounting schemes that had major scams. That wasn't Tyco. This is a major pay dispute.
But the jury didn't see it that way. He was sentenced to 8 to 25 years in order to pay restitution and fines of almost $200 million. It's unclear if he'll have any money left when he's released. In the meantime, he spends much of his time in prison focused on his appeal. He can receive visitors on the weekends, but he says he has few friends left.
In the final analysis, most of the people were close to you because of your power and your wealth.
That's correct. And they wanted to share in that. That was probably 90% of the people in my life.
And they didn't give a damn about Dennis Kozlowski, the man.
That's a hard thing to reconcile yourself to, but it did happen.
And it was not just his friends who left him.
How about Karen?
Well, we're divorcing, and we're moving on.
But was his marriage, like so many things in his life, all about money?
We're in the middle of a divorce and agreement. I'm not going to say anything about that, at this time.
He says he tries to stay positive. He's 60 years old now, and the harsh reality of his predicament is inescapable.
When you're sleeping in jail, you wake up all the time because there's a light on all night. So you kind of wake up every hour wishing and praying and hoping it was just a dream. But it's not. It's reality. And it's where you are.
Oftentimes, guys get religion inside. Does that happen with you?
There's a spiritual side that I think about it and reflect on from time to time. But that's personal pride and everything.
Yeah, and you've got the time to do it.
I have plenty of time. Yes, that I have.
Which thing?
Hi, I'm Jeff Gunn.
All right, so you go back to our slides, and we start with the. Is this fraud or is this error? Start with that. Fraud or error? Will the jury decide, right? Not up to us to decide. We didn't have all the evidence and facts and everything they had. So, based on what the jury decided, was this fraud or were these errors?
Some fraud.
Okay. Jury put him in jail, right? So, decided with fraud for the most part. He thinks it's a big error. Hey, I just did everything everybody else did. It was all in the books. Everything's good. Okay, so mostly fraud. Which kind of fraud? Manipulation or misappropriation? Probably more to your point, man. Yes, yeah. All of the above. $400 million. He was charged with stealing $400 million through the sale of his stock. When the stock was overinflated because he knew things and his CEO knew things and the rest of the world didn't. So he benefited from that $400 million in the stock. $170 million that they said they basically stole from the company. Bonuses, unauthorized loans that were later written off. Some of them were paid back. Some of them were actually written off. Personal expenses you saw rolling through the organization getting paid by the company. Ian?
I was just gonna say, I kind of get the feeling that he almost felt like it was his, like the company, I don't know the standing of Tyco before Dennis Kozlowski took over, but it seems like there was a lot of growth during his tenure,
Huge, yeah.
right? And so he wasn't really being watched over. The boards, everybody's living high on the horse. Tyco's doing really well. Don't worry about it. Dennis is doing a great job.
Yeah.
So he starts just taking more because he feels like, hey, this is kind of my baby. I've made it grow to this point, so I'm owed this money. You know, I mean, obviously that kind of comes into the rationalization part of it.
That's
But
exactly right.
you know, I mean, I can imagine that would happen. That probably goes on a lot. You know, I mean, the board's not watching it because they're doing well. The company's doing great. Their earnings per share through the roof. Everybody's just like turning a blind eye to it. They probably kind of knew some of that stuff was going on, but they didn't really care because things were going so well with the company, and so
Yeah.
I don't know.
Perfect. Yeah, that's excellent rationalization. I built this company. This is my company. I can turn it into my piggy bank. No one's going to care. Nobody's watching. Opportunity. Matt.
While we were watching, I just pulled up the SEC file from Price Waterhouse, who was the auditor on this issue,
Yeah.
right? And the SEC claimed that something pretty general, that they should have known or that there were signs, right?
Right.
Price Waterhouse was claiming that because of, not claiming, but because of the growth, their engagement had not quadrupled, it had gone, right? Their
Accelerated.
engagement and fee for this
Yeah.
over the 10 years had gone up almost 1,000 times,
Right.
right? Because they're acquiring all these different companies. So Price Waterhouse, to your point, was on the, they're on the dole too.
Yeah. Everybody wins at that point until all crashes and everybody loses. Yeah. So you're pointing out some great things. At the opportunity, nobody was watching. The board was asleep. He didn't have accountability to virtually anybody. Rationalized it. I'm king of the hill. I'm the man. I built this company. Everybody owes it to me. And then the incentive's pretty obvious because it's financially related, and he can benefit from salary bonuses, avoiding sales tax, whatever he's going to do. Stock.
Would these things be pretty obvious to an auditor coming in and searching?
You know, it's weird. You'd think they should be, and we've learned lessons from these. We're better now, thanks to Sarbanes-Oxley and some things we're talking about today. We're more attentive to it than we've been in the past, but sometimes you just kind of forget to design procedures around the things that could happen. We do a much better job today in our brainstorming meetings to say, okay, step back. If we were Dennis, and we do this, we actually paint a picture. How would that CEO, why would he do it? Incentive, motivation, rationalization. What's his opportunity? And we target it. Well, he'd be more inclined to try to prop up the stock so he could cash out. You wouldn't think of him as much pulling money out of the company. You just say, oh, well, there's a bonus. He deserved it. Awesome. You got a loan back then. You could have loans. That was one of the things that changed with Sarbanes is you can no longer loan your executive officers money from the company, and that was because of this.
So was it not necessarily a blind eye, but just not looking for it kind of thing? Just not.
Yeah, not designing
not
tests
yeah.
that were responsive to the kinds of fraud that could be occurring. And because of all of this, we now do that. Didn't before, but we do now. Lessons learned, right? From Tyco and Enron and WorldCom, the like of it. All right, so one, we give you an indication of kind of how to decipher what's misappropriation, what's manipulation, how does this broad triangle look in reality? It all comes down. But what this really leads to is kind of a process of going through and determining what to do about it. That requires an integrated framework. Integrated meaning thinking about all the angles, all the aspects, every corner of the business, all the functions, and how to put that together. And that's COSO that we were talking about. COSO stands for Committee of Sponsoring Organizations. The Committee of Sponsoring Organizations is made up of 5 groups called the Treadway Commission. These 5 groups are on the board. You're familiar with some of them: AICPA, American Institute of Certified Public Accountants; AAA, American Academic Association; IIA, Internal Audit Association; FEI, Financial Executive Institute; and IMA, Institute of Managerial Accounting. So I can go over those one more time. If you didn't get those, you guys know AICPA. AAA is the American Accounting Association. Those are the academics. So all of us at the university that are in accounting, we're accounting professors, we ascribe to that. The IIA is the Institute of Internal Auditors. That's corporate internal auditors that meet and talk about maybe interesting things. FEI is the Financial Executives Institute. That's your CEO, controller type, vice president of finance. That's their avenue to get resources to do their jobs more effectively. And the IMA is the Institute of Managerial Accountants. That's your cost accountants, budgetary accountants, strategists, and so forth. These groups came together. It's funny because they came together in reaction to the FCPA. So it all started in '77. You know, Nixon has the Watergate problem. Corporations are getting investigated for their misdeeds with bribery and corruption. Corporations are in the spotlight for not recording everything in their books that should be recorded, hiding it from the government. All of this culminates to the act, the Foreign Practices Act comes out. Part of that regulates that companies have to have books and records, they've got to have internal controls. People don't know what to do with that notion of internal controls. It's not widely talked about. Companies just don't have controls in the late 70s. Auditors are kind of generally thinking about it, but they don't spit it much into their audits. So after that, in the 80s, controls were talked about a lot, but were still fuzzy. People didn't really know what to do with it. So it took until this organization was put together early on, but it took until '92 for COSO to really put any meat on the bones, any structure around it. So it wasn't until '92 that the COSO framework was built, and it became more important in 2002, as you can imagine. 2003 was kind of the hard when Sarbanes was really getting going. Because of Sarbanes-Oxley, public companies attached to COSO, they needed something because Sarbanes basically regulated controls. Public companies were then required, because of Sarbanes-Oxley, to be able to show that they had good controls. Auditors were coming in to audit controls and put a report on them. So that COSO structure that was originated in '92 became highly important by the early 2000s because of what you just saw. One example of dozens of frauds that were occurring at the company level as to how to institute controls. So this is what it looks like. It's not rocket science, it's easy to memorize. At the top of the cube are the objectives. It says operations, reporting, and compliance. We're going to focus on reporting, obviously. Financial statements themselves. Down the face, the control environment, the risk assessment, control activities, info and communication, and monitoring activities become the types of control elements that you should have in place under the framework. I'll go over those. Down the side are the dimensions of the cube that entail different divisions, processes, functions of the company, different reporting units, operations, so that you don't leave anything out. For instance, if you just kind of focused on reporting and all 5 of the elements, but just for your headquarters, you might be forgetting that you have operations down in Australia, you've got an entirely different manufacturing facility in China. So it's getting you to, down the side of the cube is getting you to think about anywhere control ought to be considered. All right, so starting with the top, you might be able to think about controls from an operational perspective. How are we building our products? Streamlining operations, cost cutting. That's the operational side. So you can build controls around that. We're not going to focus on that in this class. On the compliance end, you might have OSHA responsibilities for safety, employee safety, FTC regulations on how you market your product, SEC obviously, you've got to report and issue your financial statements. The reporting is going to focus mostly on GAAP compliance, the things that we'll be talking about in the class. So if you just start with reporting, the financial statements themselves, the basis of all of this is the control environment. If you don't get it right, nothing else is going to matter in your controls. You might as well just give up. If you can't get that yellow row right, don't even bother with the rest of it. Okay, that whole Kozlowski issue was really based on that control environment being sour, right? It was tainted. What that is it's the integrity and ethics of the top of the organization. Are you hiring a CFO, a controller, a chief operating officer who have those ethics, can act ethically? What kind of tone are they sending? What's the tone at the top of the organization? Is it do what you want? Let's all live high on the hog. Let's have these big wild parties. Nobody's watching. Nobody cares. Or is it we're going to have some discipline here? There's accountability. We're going to set up lines of authority and hold each other accountable. Report to each other how we're doing. That's what goes into that control environment. A big part of that control environment, which was missing in Tyco, was this notion of corporate governance or oversight. The board was not functional. There was no audit committee. If there was, it wasn't working in Tyco. So having board of directors and a group of that board of directors that will call management on the carpet, keep them in check in on the financial controls, make sure that they have controls, approve bonuses and commissions and those kind of things. That's all part of that oversight of corporate governance that has to be there. So really, if you don't have the right people, they don't have the ethical values you need in the organization, they're not setting the right tone, you don't have a good oversight of the organization, you're not set up to succeed in this model. So we start with that. As auditors, we look very carefully at who is on the audit committee. What are their qualifications? How are they meeting and what's going on in those meetings? Are they really challenging the numbers, the controls, people? We're looking very carefully at that. We're also getting a feel for the attitude. What do the people in the organization feel about the leaders? Do they trust them? Are they getting pressure from them? Do they feel like they're sleazy? They're dirty? They're not doing things right? What's the code of conduct? Does the company have that in play? Looking for that as well. People adhere to it. Do they know what it is? Do they sign a document saying they're going to live by it? It's all sitting there in that control environment. So you can imagine that becomes vital to the success of all of this. Then we get to risk assessment. If we have the right people and culture and tone, then we can get to an oversight. Then we get to the fact that we can step back and say, all right, what in reporting, top, and down the side in all of our divisions and subsidiaries, functions, what are the bad things that can happen? We already know the bad things that can happen, right? It's errors and fraud. Now we get down to the nitty-gritty across the side of that cube. Where it's going to happen, who's going to do it, what are the systems that are working, kind of getting down to information communications, how does everything work together? Once you have just a pure understanding of how information flows across the organization, what the incentives, motivations, and pressures are, what kinds of errors and fraud can occur, and you really have to understand, like you did in SUA, how everything's moving, right? Who does what, and how are things getting logged, what kinds of transactions do we have. That's the risk assessment, where it's a real concerted, scientific method of saying sales could be recorded at the wrong amount. And it's going to happen right here. Somebody is creating the sales order, or somebody's inputting it into the system. Or there could be incentive for somebody to backdate some sales. occurs on January 6th, that salesperson wants a commission. It's not going to be until the next year. They don't want to wait until the next year. They want to get it, in their current year bonus or commission check. So they change the date and bring it back. From an accounting perspective, that's fraud. Got to get everything in the right period. It wasn't sold until January. It doesn't go into December. So the company has to step back and say, well, there's a risk. There's a risk that people could do that. Incentive, there's rationalization. So we got to make it so there's no opportunity, and that's the point of the risk assessment. Determining the incentives, pressures, rationalization, motivation. Determining how the system and people and processes are working so we can understand the risks, so we can do something about it and take away that opportunity. That gets us to the next piece. We know what the risks are all the way down the side of that cube. We can put controls in place, and that's going to be a big part of this class. What are those controls? What risks are they mitigating? Where do we put them? And how often do we do those controls? So examples of controls would be authorizing a purchase order, or doing a reconciliation of a cash account and having somebody review that reconciliation. Having cash put in a safe, keeping it in a bank. All of these kinds of controls that are going throughout the organization. It could be one person in the finance department at the end of every month after the books are closed, going through and doing a real vivid line-by-line analysis of every account. Setting an expectation. Anything that's off of the expectation by some dollar amount, that person's going to start digging in until they find out why that occurred, to see if there are errors or fraud. Lots of different controls we'll talk about in class. The information communication is whatever accounting system you're using, how that's being utilized, all the way down the dimensions of the side. What are they using in Singapore versus what are they using in Italy versus what are we using here in the US? Are they the same system that's integrated? Or do we have like 40 different accounting systems across the world that some poor schmuck has to bring all that information together into one ball of wax? That's information communication. Monitoring, just think of like internal audit. Having somebody in the organization that goes back and checks those controls. Is it working or not working? Where can we improve the controls? If they're not working, who's going to fix them? Okay. A lot of that goes back up to the control environment, meaning that individual or group of individuals that is monitoring the controls will report to the audit committee how those are working or not working. So the audit committee can slam down the fist and make sure management has a budget to go back through this whole process and improve the controls. All right, so pretty simplistic in nature. The guts of it really are starting with the control environment, getting that right, and then figuring out the right controls to implement based on your risk assessment. So the top three, are really the core of this whole thing. By the way, it's the 2013 revision that it said a couple slides ago. It was originated in 1992. It kind of stayed the same until 2013. And then they added these 17 principles. Excuse me for just a second. I seem to have an emergency in the hall. I'll be right back. I'm sorry. I had like a neighbor call me and now my daughter's call. This is not, it's just unusual. The auditor tells me to answer this call.
It's getting colder though. Like before break it wasn't as bad.
Well, they for sure like did something to the thermostat. They totally did something to the thermostat. It's like 5 degrees colder. Oh, me too. Lockers in the parking lot.
All right, that's
And a
cool.
scarf.
Okay, so 17 principles were established. What it was is you just kind of had a whole book, this huge book of what COSO was and what this integrated framework was, but it had no structure to it. So by the time we had Sarbanes kick in the early 2000s and people had to start using it, it wasn't very usable. There needed to be more context, more detail. These 17 principles were established to essentially classify each one of the elements of control into principles that would be most applicable. For instance, as I went through the control environment with you, we talked about things like tone at the top, and ethics and integrity. We looked at oversight. Well, these are all things that got put into these categories. For instance, to have a good control environment, you have the principles of demonstrating commitment, integrity, and ethical values, usually at the executive level, board level. 2, having oversight, that is the board and the audit committee doing their jobs, checking in on management. Establishing structure, authority, and responsibility, giving those lines of authority and accountability so people can check and hold each other in check. Hiring people under number 4 that are competent, can do the job, have the technical abilities to do it, especially in accounting and in IT, and then just enforcing that accountability. So those are just examples of how this got. I'm not going to test you on each one of these individually. What's number 18 or what's number 16? Not going to do that. Most importantly, would just be to get the essence of the control environment and the risk assessment, if nothing else, is to kind of understand what some examples of the individual elements and what those might be. But I just wanted you to see kind of the evolution of how we went to a little murkier 1993 version of COSO to a more concise, structured element or structure of COSO. Yeah.
Did something happen in 2013 to make this?
No, it just took them that long.
Okay.
For whatever reason. And
Like testing things out and just seeing what's needed?
Yeah, just when you've got 5 different associations and bodies all trying to work together to say, what is this? It's too many people. There's too many chefs in the kitchen. It took them 10 years to basically figure this out. Because, Sarbanes kicked in, heated up in 2003, and then you've got a lot of practitioners and auditors saying, okay, well, now we're held to this. We have to go do an audit of controls. The issuers were saying we have to have controls. COSO's great, but it needs to be more structured. And then it took these 5 groups all coming together in these meetings, and maybe they'd have a meeting once a month. It took them 10 years to get to this, which was all in there. It just wasn't categorized very well. That's a great question. All right. I'm going to end with this. If you look at in the queue, the blue line is control activities, and that's kind of the punchline of what to do about the risks that you identify in the olive line, the green line. Then these are the control activities that we're going to start with. There's some IT controls we'll get into as well. But these are some examples of what we use in the class. And they are segregation of duties, meaning we talked about earlier keeping the accountants away from the cash, right? That's kind of a given. We'll get into that, give you some examples of segregation of duties. Authorizing transactions, purchase orders, for instance, write-offs on account, credit, establishing credit for customers are some good examples of that. So authorization means before we get into a transaction, we're going to check it out and make sure it's the right transaction before we proceed with it. You saw some of that in Warren's orders. There were some examples of purchase orders being signed and sales orders being approved and so forth. Put in your notes under number 3, the documentary controls are the audit trail. And the audit trail is taking anything from a source document and then being able to trace it through all the journals and ledgers, other ancillary documents along the way, like invoices, shipping documents. So being able to, not only as an auditor, but as a controller, figure out the story. What happened from beginning to end? How do we take what we ended up with in the general ledger, trace it all the way back, evidence? That's the audit trail or documentary controls. So at any given point in time, you can pull any piece of evidence. Here's an invoice, $30,000 to customer XYZ for 10,000 units. Okay, so that invoice I should be able to see tracing back to a shipping document, back to a sales order. I should see it getting logged in a journal, a sales journal. sub-ledger, all of that going to the general ledger. So you should be able to piece it all together. This is why I gave you SUA, the Warren Sports assignment. That was a documentary audit trail, which becomes essential to your understanding of controls, of how to audit things. That's pretty quintessential what we're doing here. Safeguarding of assets is pretty obvious. Safes, locks, security alarms, security guards. That just means we have something we want to safeguard. Usually we're talking about cash and inventory, and just not being loose with it, so people can't walk away with it. That one's pretty easy. Finally, the big detective control here. Most of these are preventative in nature. We're not even going to enter in the transaction if we don't authorize it. We've got segregation of duties. People probably can't steal from us and cover up. But those are all preventative. In the end, you have a detective control, which means we're going to step back and say, does this look right? Do our accounts reconcile from an analytical basis? Does depreciation expense look like what we thought it would be for the last 7 months? It's been $2 million a year or a month, and now it's 6. Something doesn't make sense. Just stepping back, tying it all out, making it all work is that final piece of it. Now we're going to get into IT controls as well. It's kind of a different discipline. I'll put that on hold for now. So I'd like you to memorize these 5, just, you know, somewhat regurgitationally, but also a little bit of application driven as we get into this. These are the ones we're going to be using as we talk about controls. That then kind of paints the picture of where we're going. Fraud can occur, errors can occur. Why does fraud occur? The fraud triangle. Examples of fraud occurring, Kozlowski. What do we do about it? We go through a good analysis of the COSO queue. We set up our controls. What are some examples of controls? I define it as these 5. That's going to qualify us and really set us up for the rest of the class as we get into planning an audit and determining our understanding of controls and executing the audit. This will be a core part of what we do and what we talk about. All right, what are your questions? Ian.
So we have an exam on Tuesday.
Yeah.
What? You know, obviously we've never taken one. We've never taken one of your exams before. What's the best way to prepare?
These will be multiple choice questions.
Okay.
I'm not going to give you guys essays like I do my other classes. So it'll just roughly be about 40 multiple choice questions. The stem of the questions will basically say, you know, which is not an example of incentive in the fraud triangle. And I might have a few things that are rationalization, poor controls being opportunity, but then I'll have like a bonus based on revenue. And there you go, that's the incentive right there. That's an example of what the multiple choice might look like.
Do we need to scour the chapters, or can we focus on the slides that you've...
The discussions we had in class will be imperative. Reading the chapter got you ready to think about the things we're talking about in class each day. I really cater my tests to the things we focused on the most in class. Okay. So I don't want to say slides because my slides are too big. You know, you think about what you just saw, there was a triangle. There were like 3 words on it. That doesn't get you very far. So it's going to be your notes, your video, your recollection of what we were talking about in class, the examples I used, the framing that I gave you, but most importantly, how to use that framing. So if I say, what's an example of how Kozlowski misappropriated, and I put in cooked the books or was just an idiot, or you know, but one of them says, you know, took loans from the company and wrote them off, or intermingled personal funds. That's where he misappropriated. So you're able to apply it, right? I know what misappropriation means. I know what Kozlowski did, and I can find that in the answers. Okay. We talk more about it on Monday, but that's what I plan to do, is just about 40 multiple choice questions for you guys. Okay. Just so we can kind of get this in pieces and then do a brain dump and make sure you guys are getting it, and then move on to the next section. I don't plan on having this cumulatively, so each test should just be a quarantine of everything we learned from the last test to the test. if that's okay. All right. Other thoughts or questions as we part? Yeah, Carissa.
I missed the F. What does that stand for?
That's the Financial Executives Institute. Financial Executives Institute, which is the CFO, controller type, vice president of finance type people within an organization. So not the auditors, not the academics, not the internal auditors, actual people that are drafting the financial statements. Okay, anything else, Ian?
Some of the professors allow us a crib sheet. Is that something that you'll be doing, or?
I don't think you'll need it in this class. Those are more relevant for like when you have problems and you're trying to structure it out to a problem. This will all be more subjective in nature. So in this one I want to test your brain power because in a CPA exam, it's going to be how it works. So I'm going to get you acclimated to that. I actually think if you had a cheat sheet, it would be too easy. Everybody would get an A. We don't want everybody to get an A. I have a few A minuses out there, right? Yeah, let's not do cheat sheets. We'll see how the first test goes, and I think you'll be comfortable. I don't think it's going to shock you. And I'll be here if you have questions. I'm happy to be able to show. And if I've just written something funky, then we'll fix it right there on the spot. Not trying to trick you. I'm actually trying to educate you so you can actually pass a test, right? It's my goal. Not confuse the hell out of you. Okay, and this is a much different subject, right? I mean, this should be something that is more usable and more practical in nature. My test will be the same, usable and practical. All right, guys, enjoy your day.